Hello everyone, this is John Paul Leone here with Sharp Young Minds, which is the YouTube channel that I'm dedicating to focusing on the youth and conservatism and just discussions and politics and everything. And so today we have a debate regarding capital punishment and the death penalty, and I'm here with my friend
Andrew Holmes. Hello, I'm a student here at Berkeley, and you can find me in the YouTube channel linked below.
That's right. So I will be linking his YouTube channel below where we do a lot of great work. I'm also, as you guys know of me, John Paul, I'm the president of Turning Point. You also hear a student at UC Berkeley, and we're going to have a nice, fun conversation in my charismatic dorm room. Is that a good way to describe a dorm room as charismatic? It's kind of personification.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's kind of off topic. So what we're going to do here, the topic of the debate is, should the death penalty be enacted in the United States? And so we're going to do a pretty free-form debate here. It's going to be an opening statement. I will give the first opening statement. Then Andrew will give the second opening statement. Then we'll have a long portion of open dialogue, and then we'll have some brief closing remarks afterwards. So, anyways, are you ready for the debate?
I think I am, yes.
Okay. Sounds good. And of course, thank you for being here. Of course, we did the introductions and all that.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Yep. Now, before I begin my discussion of policy, I would like you to meet a man known as Carl Panzram. In 1922, Carl Panzram met a young boy in a Portland bar, and after a pleasant exchange over a few drinks, Carl invited the young boy back to his yacht. Then Carl proceeded to horrifically torture the boy to the point where he couldn't scream. He tied him down so he couldn't run, and finally, he brutally and sadistically raped the boy and watched the life drain from his eyes as he strangled him to death. After tossing the dead body into the ocean, Carl went right back to the bar, awaiting for his next victim. Carl did this again and again and again until he amassed 22 murder victims and over 1,000 rape victims. Carl bragged about these numbers. When he was caught, he said, quote, "I enjoyed raping and killing. I did this because I liked it." He had no desire to reform, but instead preferred to, quote, "reform the people who try to reform him by killing them." He emphasized that he would do this to anyone, and that means to you and your children as well. And he said, quote, "I wish the entire human race had one neck and I had my hands on it." Some people deserve to die. Some crimes are just so monstrous that no penalty short of death can match the moral gravity of the act. And so my proposal for my system with the death penalty today is one that is administered in these sorts of extreme and rare cases where there's a long deliberation process, meaning the criminal spends a long time in jail typically before an execution is administered. That way there's ample time for potential calculations and legal systems to be made such that we would never err in our administration of the death penalty. And this would probably be a situation in which there were more death penalties, people sentenced to death penalties than death penalties actually enacted, such that with the legal system in the United States, a lot of people already get sentenced to death, but a lot of people get off on parole due to things such as good behavior, and so forth. And my reasons for justifying the death penalty lie in a few things, a few principles. One is retributivism, 2 is moral teaching, 3 is deterrence, and 4 is rehabilitation. Now for my first point, if you share the intuition that Carl Panzram, the guy I described earlier today, deserves to be punished, then congratulations, you are a retributivist. As a retributivist myself, I plan to maintain the claim that punishment onto the guilty, or retributive justice, is intrinsically morally good, thus meaning that the act itself of punishing Carl is right, insofar as it achieves retributive justice. To demonstrate this further, imagine Carl, on his way home from a long night of killing, gets into a huge accident that renders him paralyzed. When he wakes up from the accident, he finally realizes the weight of what he does and undergoes a moral transformation. Furthermore, let's say it's possible to create the appearance that he has been punished without him actually being punished, leading others to believe that he has received punishment. In this case, punishment onto him would be insufficient in achieving metrics such as deterrence, protection of society, rehabilitation, moral teaching, or any other retributist theories. For Carl has no capacity, no need, no desire to commit any crimes. And we can still then ask, should he still be punished? And our intuitions would tell us yes, he should still be punished. Yet the only explanation we have for this is retributive justice is intrinsically morally good. Carl still deserves punishment and thus should still be punished. Furthermore, in this case, a death sentence would be the only suitable punishment. All other punishments would be insufficient in achieving such retributive justice. The punishment should be in scale with accordance to Carl's actions. And so if we were to simply give Carl a $75 fine, we would be appalled by the lack of justice. And so this seems to be pretty reasonable to say that punishment should scale in accordance with the actions and the crimes that are committed. And so when we talk about the death penalty, the reason why we can see intuitively, we know that Carl is a person who deserves to die and thus should be given such treatment. And we cannot afford to enact insufficient punishment onto him. And to not include the death penalty would be kind of arbitrary in our metrics of punishments that are available to us. My opponent may offer a situation in which life imprisonment would be preferred, but I think that would be arbitrary to exclude a death penalty from potential considerations. And the reasons for this is that the punishments we enact onto people would generally be considered a violation of basic human rights and dignity. You can't just hold someone captive in a prison for no good reason. And the basis for and foundation for our ability to make such actions would be this sort of retributive justice. And so when you allow violations of what would generally be considered a violation of human dignity, it would not make sense to cut it off arbitrarily at the death penalty. And so there's also no better way to uphold human dignity because a lack of punishment would demean human dignity onto someone like Carl. So if we were to fail to punish Carl, say the $75 fine again, this would demean human dignity because surely the taking of life and having people seek their ultimate ends is something that should be punished in a unique sense. And is also something that punishing in a unique sense through the death penalty would show to society how just the pure weight of the action. Again, the basis for this punishment is retributive justice. And so when we have retributive justice as the basis for a punishment, in this case, then it makes it possible to go to these lengths to once again scale with the punishment. And so we also use these sorts of punishment as a teacher of morality. For instance, when someone receives the ultimate punishment, this tells our children and our members of society what is right and what is wrong, the true weight of things. So for instance, if we only administered life in prison, then someone such as Carl would receive the same exact punishment as someone who, in a sort of rage of sorts, murders someone in the second degree. And so we would see that, of course, not all killings are equal, and not all actions or crimes are equal, and so they must be scaled properly. And if we do not allow for the death penalty to be within that scale, then we're not scaling these actions properly, and they don't infuse the moral weight of these actions onto society. Another reason is deterrence, of course. Now, there's not too much data on deterrence in regards to this case, but what I want to do is I want to narrow the scope a bit for deterrence because most homicides are done in the second degree, and thus most studies or statistics and things regarding homicides are not reflected properly in this deterrence theory. So I'd rather much prefer on first degree murders and murder markets or terrorism because these are cases in which there is an incentivizing structure for people to react to things that incentivize them to commit crimes or de-incentivize them to commit crimes. And especially in a murder market, when there's a more calculating force behind it, we do see that these sorts of criminals are more likely to adjust their actions in accordance with the sort of a death penalty. So there would be a murder market is much less likely to flourish within a society that has a death penalty versus one that doesn't. Same thing with terrorism, of course, and this just kind of funnily enough goes into foreign policy a lot. When there's a huge threat of death for inactions and for movements, then terrorists and certain organizations that commit acts of terror are much more likely to refrain from committing such acts. And then another reason is rehabilitation, of course. So there's another incentivizing structure laid within my system of the death penalty and my framework, which is namely that a prisoner has some time to essentially improve their moral character. So a genuine improvement of their moral character, their actions. Essentially, if they're well behaved in prison, then they could essentially potentially get off of parole on that basis. And so also just having the sentencing of like, you are going to be sentenced to death is something that's often like has huge emotional weight for a lot of people. And someone who committed a heinous first degree murder may start to realize the horrors of what they have done. And so I think I've laid out a pretty good reason to allow for the death penalty. I also think that any argument to prefer life imprisonment over the death penalty in a case such as Carl that I provided would be either arbitrary or non-principled. And so with that being said, I think I'm going to now leave it up to my opponent. My opening statement has been completed now.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the core reason for my opposition to the death penalty is basically creating a system in accordance with the core right to life that I think the majority of conservatives would agree with, including, of course, JP. And now, the first thing I want to get out of the way is that the justification of the death penalty falls on the supporting side, which, of course, JP has laid out his case here to support the death penalty. And I just think that's an important thing to know, because this is the active position of allowing a case where we would be allowed to take someone's life. And so I think that is important. Now, there's two things to understand in why I believe the right to life would still apply to people who commit even the most heinous of crimes once they've been imprisoned. So reason number one, I'd say, is we need a meaningful distinction as to when the death penalty should apply. And there is not exactly any meaningful line we can draw other than just whenever there's a murder. And I don't think most people would agree that all murders should be sentenced to death. If that's the stance that JP wants to hold, then I would gladly object to it. But I'd say that in general, we'd find that absurd. And any other case is either just, there's going to be some just arbitrary cases where under that system, they may or may not be justified in using the death penalty there, which, again, I don't think we can arbitrarily apply a right, like the right to life, or they're going to reduce down to a case of special pleading. Or it will reduce down to a case where essentially the state decides, and in that case, virtually any crime could be punished by the death penalty, which would be extremely absurd. Now, the second thing to understand is that the death penalty fundamentally denies the right to life. Now, the natural objection that gets brought up here is, what about the right to life in the case of self-defense? You wouldn't say that if someone was charging at you with a knife and you shot them with a gun, you violated their right to life. And I would agree. And the thing that I think is important to understand in the distinction is that in the case I laid out there is an active threat to your own rights, which allows you to violate the rights, because the rights extend to the extent that they don't infringe on someone else's right. Now, when a prisoner has been taken into captivity, he is no longer a threat, at least under any current first world system that we have. And so in America, we have the resources to contain the prisoners that we do use the death penalty on. And that would be perfectly feasible. And one of the objections that gets brought up to that is, like, what about the budget? But the reality is we're already containing the prisoners that are sentenced to the death penalty for 20 to 30 years before they're executed. And so the reality is, what about the budget is arbitrary, because first, they're already being contained for a very long time before they're sentenced to death. And then Second, there's very, very few people sentenced to the death penalty already. And so I don't think in terms of, oh, what about the budget if we were to have these prisoners be just contained is a valid objection. Now, the other thing is that in terms of retribution, I would agree that retribution is important. However, I would argue, and we will get into this in discussion, that I don't think cutting off the death penalty is an arbitrary line, because I truthfully do believe that there are things that we could do that would be arguably worse than just killing the person. And we would cut off the line there because we'd find that cruel and unusual, such as if we were to chop off all their arms and then just like pour acid onto them and torture them to death. Society would find that incredibly absurd, and I think my opponent would also find that absurd, but that is objectively worse than just sentencing someone to death, because we are torturing them and then killing them, which obviously has a greater evil, and we would cut that off in our system. And so saying that we need to include the death penalty in order to be able to have retribution, I believe is a fundamentally flawed dichotomy where basically it's either we have the death penalty or we don't have retribution, which I don't believe, or proper retribution, I guess you could say. And I don't believe that is the reality. And so in sum, I don't see a meaningful reason as to why the right to life ought to be violated in the case of the death penalty.
All right, I guess we can open up to open discussion then.
Yes.
So I think a lot of what I'm kind of like concerned about is that I think a lot of your points also lie on you to justify. And the reason why I say this is because you need a justification for any punishment at all to begin with.
Yes.
Not just like a death penalty punishment. So like what would your justification for like life imprisonment be?
I would say retribution. And the thing with retribution is there's certain theories of it. I'd say basically in general, I think it should be about eye for an eye, but obviously I agree it's going to be hard to draw the line. The problem here is we are violating the most fundamental right, and we need a justification to do that, especially like above all else. Because
I think the issue that I have here is like not all, like not everyone has equal human dignity in the sense that it would be equally wrong to kill them. There are like
I would argue that everyone has equal human dignity. Now, I wouldn't argue that the right to life is absolute, but I would argue for equal human dignity. Yes.
I mean, yes, but that doesn't mean that it would be just as bad to like kill Carl Panvrim, as I mentioned, as it would be to kill like an innocent child. Like, do you think that those two killings are equivalent?
Not necessarily, though. I think, in a sense, you also would have to add more context to that, because we could suppose some random guy comes along, doesn't know who Carl Panvrim is, and kills him. And I'd argue that action in itself is still equally as bad as if he just went and killed the random person.
So do you remember like the case where Carl Panzram gets into a car accident, or gets into an accident and he's paralyzed now? And then, so what we do in this case, like, so would it be just as wrong for the government to administer the death penalty onto him as it would be for me to kill like an innocent child?
No, I disagree with that.
Okay, what's your reason?
I'd agree
that there's differences.
Carl's more wrong, yeah. Sorry, less wrong.
The other
less wrong, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think that there is retribution in the death penalty. I'm not arguing that it's inherently unjust. I'm just arguing that I don't think the theory of retribution covers the death penalty, because truthfully, the case that you're making relies on the line being the death penalty, which I don't know why the line's there. I can think of way worse punishments than just the death penalty.
I mean, if we did a little waterboarding to Carl, I wouldn't be very taken aback by that.
Would you be taken aback if we flayed his arms in public and made his blood spray everywhere and then poured acid on his head and then killed him?
I mean, I don't think I would care too much. I would have much empathy for Carl in that case.
I mean, I would find that pretty absurd in terms of what we're allowing the state to do.
I don't think there's really there's not like practical benefits to doing that.
I'd say it's a stronger deterrence.
In many ways, I think a stronger deterrent. No, so what I would say in that case is like where we just like completely like chop off his arms and like mutilate him. Like what we need is an ultimate punishment, and the death penalty serves as the sort of ultimate punishment. And we don't. It's not a necessity that we introduce certain torturing things. Like I said, if Carl was someone who was subject to torture, I wouldn't really care too much. I don't think many people would care too much.
The death penalty is the ultimate punishment then.
Yeah, because it's a punishment in a unique sense. So there's this concept dubbed by like Michael Moore known as moral desert. And so what that concept essentially meant is that since like with the unique action of like taking someone's life, like the way that I described like Carl doing, must be met with a sort of unique type punishment.
Yes, I'd argue the punishment that I laid out of flaying his arms and pouring acid on his head, and then I'd argue you could even preserve him alive in that state.
So my issue with like my issue with a lot of like the well, first of all, that's not very unique to like just like holding him captive in prison. But my whole like issue with life imprisonment as like the final thing is that like it is a like that is an action that would normally be a violation of human dignity. Like I mentioned that in my opening statement.
Yes,
if you just
but
like hold
not
someone
to the
captive.
same extent as taking their life. Because there's
the issue is like, why do we allow? So you are in a case where you are admitting to allowing violations of human dignity. So like, why does it stop at the death penalty?
I'm allowing violations of the right to freedom, yes, in the sense that I do agree with the theory of retribution. However, I don't see a meaningful reason as to why we should use the death penalty. And actually, I would ask on the studies that you brought up specifically. Do you know the methodology behind
I didn't bring up any studies.
Okay, so those were just unsubstantiated claims about terrorism and murder markets?
It was just like a general thing that we've seen, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say I need some proof that it actually does effectively deter them, because, I mean, I don't have any specific studies.
Donald Trump's ceasefire with Hamas.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so part of like the terrorism claim is like like I guess it's a sort of foreign policy principle as well, like for deterrence, is that like the peace through strength idea. When you have like America as a hegemonic force, then that means like certain foreign nations would be less likely to engage in conflict, like an ongoing conflict, and so that's why we've seen like ends to like certain wars under this administration. And like we've seen that in history when there is like a
how does that show the death penalty?
Yeah, it shows it because like for instance like a large I don't know if you've seen those videos of like Trump posting like just like videos of him just like killing a whole bunch of terrorists, but we do but they do react to that, and they don't want to there's two reasons that like terrorism would react to like their fellow terrorists getting killed. One is of course they're just losing like they're just dying, so they don't want to die themselves predictably, and two, they're the loss of their own resources.
Quick question of clarification: are we talking about terrorists getting captured and then sentenced to death, or are we talking about terrorists being killed as in like chased after and
it could be both,
found and killed? Because I'd argue the second case is not a case of the death penalty, but more of a case of protecting against an active threat.
So what do you define as like an active threat then?
An active threat. So basically, I'll give the example of anything. Actually, I'll just say anything that is an active infringement on someone's right to life, or I guess, I don't know, it's hard to like exactly define just on the spot, but basically I'd say when somebody is initiating an aggression against someone else's rights. So if someone starts charging at you with a knife, then I'd say that would be an active threat. But if someone charged at you with a knife and then left, and then the police found him walking in the street and then put him in a prison cell where his hands are cuffed and he can't do anything, then that wouldn't be an active threat.
Okay, so do you think it's a necessary condition that it's like that there's an active threat in order to be like in order for your death to be justified?
I'd say either active threat, or I think you could make an argument from pragmatism for less developed countries in terms of like, oh, what if they can just get out of jail and then go murder more people? But I don't think that would apply to America. So I'd say in terms of like our developed system, yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, I mean the thing about that as well, like, and this is like the sort of like theory behind it is that someone who is in prison and is not going to be sentenced to death, there is, even if it's very much impractical for that person to escape, there's still going to be motivations from them and any like radicalized group on the outside to plot for their escape and to continue, like, so like we can imagine like a terrorism group, again, like one of their terrorists is captured and held captive, and the group might be energized in order to carry on the mission that was laid out, by kind of like energized by the ongoing existence of that person.
I mean, I could also argue that, oh, you kill them and now they're energized to go and kill the president and all the leaders because of the killing of their partner. So I don't think that would really apply, honestly.
No, I mean, it's a motivating force of like the part of like the idea of still being alive. But I think we could even just like move on. A large portion of what I was going to bring up as well, actually I didn't mention in my opening statement, is that my system is a system that is like, it's much more probable than yours to save a larger amount of lives. So like, for instance, and it doesn't even have to require administering a death penalty. For like, there could be more deterrence effects on ending people's lives, such that like, you know, there would be much less first degree murders. And then secondly, if there was like, you know, first degree murder, you know, they would still be sentenced to death. And then you might not even have to administer the death penalty for that person. And it just ends up being a net positive.
Again, if we're arguing for a system where we're not actually, or is that what we're arguing for? Is it
there's the death penalty is only administered to people like Karl Panzram.
Let me think for a second. Well, in that case, I'd argue that I don't think it's more probable to save more lives. And the reality is, the countries with the lowest crime rates are places like Norway, where they have a prison system that does not allow for a death penalty, and actually, I'm pretty sure doesn't even have a life sentence. But it's really successful at rehabilitation, basically. And I would argue that in terms of like what we can do to save more lives, we could very much change how the United States prison system functions, because as it is now, it's just designed to keep people in prison, because the prisons are actively incentivized to have more prisoners because they get paid for having prisoners. So they really are terrible at rehabilitation. And so no, I'd argue the system that's more probable to save lives is one that prioritizes rehabilitation over this idea of deterrence that I think needs to be substantiated before it can really even be said.
Okay, so Carl, who says I enjoy raping and killing, and that he doesn't want reformment, he just wants to reform people by killing them. Like,
yeah, he should be in prison for life, absolutely.
Yeah, so, but you said you refer a system that prioritizes like rehabilitation.
Yeah, I mean, would you not want him to not say those things? Like, I'd want him to change as a person.
Yeah, of course.
I'd still want him to be in prison for life.
It's the idea, though, is that there are some criminals in which it is a waste of time to rehabilitate them.
Yes, and if it even granting that, we're arguing for literally like there's 20 people who get the death penalty administered a year. So we're arguing basically we're going to be wasting time with like 20 prisoners a year, or however many people have been sentenced to the death penalty, I guess, at any given moment, which I'd argue we're already wasting
I don't
30
even
years
think
with them.
I don't think it extends to that, actually.
And then we're getting a net gain.
I do want to make a point really fast, is that like, no, it could be a waste of time to rehabilitate a lot more criminals than just the ones we administer to death. I'm not saying that the ones that I'm not even making the claim that the ones that we don't sentence to death, that we need to focus on like rehabilitating them. That's why I even had like the real rehabilitation point is that with this death penalty, like, yeah, someone could like rehabilitate on their own, which is probably the most effective way for someone to be rehabilitated, rather than like putting efforts and like government spending onto like programs to rehabilitate criminals.
Well, I'd argue we already spend way too much on basically imprisoning people for unnecessary reasons that are easily rehabilitatable. And the reality is we're actually wasting resources with our current system instead of rehabilitating people and having productive members of society. And yes, there are some people who are unrehabilitatable. But again, we're talking about wasting a fraction compared to what we'd be getting back in the general betterment of society. And so, yes, I believe in retribution, but I also believe in rehabilitation, and our system does not prioritize that in any way. And what I think you're seeking in just pure retribution, you find more of in rehabilitation.
Oh, wait, how do I find more of what I'm seeking retribution, rehabilitation?
I mean, I think in reality we've seen it play out. Like, again, the countries with the lowest crime rates are places like Norway, which have a system
Well,
that really
retribution
prioritizes
isn't about
rehabilitation.
lowering crime rate. It's about enacting something that's intrinsically morally good.
Yeah, I think we can do both. I think being sentenced to prison in itself is retribution.
Why? Why is it sufficient punishment for someone like Carl?
Why is it sufficient? It's not about whether or not it's sufficient for Carl. It's more about the society as a whole, and basically I'd rather have some people like Carl who are absolutely terrible, unrehabilitatable people that are still given the chance to be rehabilitated, and have way more people be successfully rehabilitated and become functioning members of society than a system where we don't care about lowering the crime rates, we don't care about making society better, we solely care about just basically how do we optimize for retribution. And I think we get both
you can introduce like rehabilitation stuff. It cooperates with what is the term for it? I forgot the word. But yeah, it's compatible with your view as well.
I do think it's compatible.
So I'm not claiming that we should only focus on retribution. My claim is that retribution in itself solely is a sufficient condition to enact these sorts of punishments, and namely, namely what I mentioned, like for example, like you would, and I'm sure you would agree, if we just like gave Carl like a $75 ticket, that would you would probably be appalled at that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I agree with the core theory of retribution.
You agree,
I don't
it has
think
to
retribution is a
degrade,
just enough reason to take away someone's right to life.
Yeah, I think your reasons for that are ultimately arbitrary, because we know it scales in accordance to the actions that you do, for one. So it scales. So then we have to say at some point it's cut off at like death, and the reason for that.
With that.
I think
there's worse
what I
punishments
said.
We can have than death.
No, I know that you're saying that it cuts off at death is what you're saying. Like you can't kill someone in retribution. You can't kill someone like out of retribution. Like a government cannot administer the death penalty.
I don't think a government can't. I don't think they should, because that is the ultimate, and specifically I'd say developed governments. Again, I think there's an entirely different argument to be had about pragmatics and like third world countries and whatnot. That's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about like developed governments specifically, which I think we agree on because we're talking about the United States. But
I mean, having someone like Carl in a prison could be an active threat to the other prisoners.
I'd argue, well, yes, but I'd argue solitary confinement, we can very much keep the other prisoners safe. But again, the big thing here is more so that I think we would agree that the state not enacting the death penalty for certain crimes. Because first off, I'd ask what your cutoff for retribution is, because I'd argue in terms of retribution should be equal. We agree with that? So
not necessarily.
Not necessarily?
No, so like just because you kill someone doesn't mean that you should be killed necessarily.
Why?
Because again, there's a scale to it, but doesn't mean that the scale isn't exactly like eye to eye. And we can have the sort of like Like the intuition if someone like kills another person out of rage, like in a second degree murder, we probably wouldn't administer a death penalty onto that. It's because it's not as retributive, and there could be like a claim in which like like the more
I need to understand exactly how the scale works.
yeah,
here,
it's
though.
I mean it's like kind of like a basic understanding of like intuition and of the scale, which is that like it doesn't necessitate eye to eye, I think is what I'm trying to say. Like it could be a part of it, I guess. Like if you steal $300 from a store, then you pay $300 back. So there could be like there is.
Well, I'd argue the $300 is just returning. The retribution is you pay more from your
That's
own,
that's true. I think I would agree with that actually. And so I think my part of my point again is I don't think this was sufficiently answered was allowing like certain violations of human rights, but except for the right to life.
It's not about which ones we're allowing, and I'm not arguing that there can't be retribution in the death penalty. What I'm arguing is I don't think that a modern state ought to, because the first thing I'd say is we would agree that it's not necessarily unjust if Carl were to be sentenced to life in solitary confinement instead, and he were to just live out his days
I think it would.
isolated from other people. I wouldn't. I think most people would disagree
I
with
think
that.
I do think some people deserve to die, and yeah, it's like if like the Karls and the Hitlers of the world, if we got a hold of them, then they deserve ultimate finality.
I mean, I think people might deserve to die. I don't think that gives us necessarily a reason to.
Oh, the reason for that is that it would be intrinsically morally good to administer that punishment, and so that's why I gave you the example where I take away all of the other factors that could be at play for a punishing system and showed that there is a reason to only consider retributive justice as a means of punishment.
Well, again, still the other thing, the big thing I want to get at here though is we wouldn't say it's bad if someone like Carl is sentenced. We'd say it's morally good, I'd say, if someone like Carl was sentenced to life in prison in solitary confinement. We would say that's just. I don't believe that we need the death penalty as that final justice. And
It would also be good to fine him like $1,000. So like you like my the point is that like yeah sure like
yeah, it would be
that
good
would be a
to
good
fine him $1,000.
like,
But again, I think here it's more about keeping society safe than anything else is the ultimate point of it. Though we do need retribution as well. I would agree with that. I would argue that having to live your life in a prison cell is enough retribution in itself. I don't think there's a sufficient reason as to why I don't think there's a sufficient reason as to why we just sentence him to death and not do more, really, under this system. And again, I think we would agree that's sufficient enough to protect society is to keep him in prison for life.
okay, so why I'm trying to why do you think like because I don't think that like a life in prison would be like super like retributive at all, even like we're allowing and this actually kind of goes to the point about like the budget, which is that like yeah like the concerns about like the budget I don't think is necessarily that we're spending more money to like keep these prisoners alive, but it's more that the purpose of the money is going to constantly preserving the life of someone like Carl, and that's not something that we would want to support our money with. Whereas like in my system, like if there's someone who spends like 20 years on death row and then gets like if Carl spends like someone for Carl might the process might be sooner, by the way, it might be more like 2 to 5 years for someone like Carl. But like for in that instance, yeah sure like we are technically still like paying money to keep him alive until the execution point, but it's with the ultimate purpose that we are seeking his finality in retributive justice. So that was that was like kind of like the point about the budget. What do you think of that?
I think I just disagree, honestly, there. Again, I'm someone who really cares about minimizing the budget, minimizing spending, and I can understand why people might think that way. However, the ultimate thing here is that we can ultimately the point of a justice system is to keep society safe. Do we agree on that, or?
No, I think the foundation is retribution, actually.
And retribution.
Yeah, because I think that in any case where you have something that would normally be a violation of someone's rights, you would have to have a reason to supersede that violation. So I don't think that you can like I don't think you could commit certain violations on other people for the sake of benefiting other people. Like I can't like shoot 2 people to save 3 people, for instance. Like there's like certain like principles that I can't like. It'd probably be wrong for me to like stab someone in the stomach, so that way like someone like has I don't know, like recovers from some illness or whatever.
Yeah. So we agree. We have these core rights, and when they're infringed upon, that needs to be basically people need to be protected, and people need to basically get their due back for having their rights violated. That's the core reason of retribution.
So
right?
I think sure. I think a large point about like the protection of society is that if we have a case in which someone like if like I mentioned like Carl gets paralyzed, like he's not a threat to society because he can't rape or kill anyone again. But we would still punish him for retribution, and I'm sure you would still say that it should be at least life in prison for him. Would you agree? Yeah. So it would seem like in that case we don't even need the protection of society at all as a way to establish our justice system.
No, I think it's one of the necessary reasons for a justice system.
It's
though.
I want to
protection
clarify.
of rights. Retribution. I think the reason we want retribution is protection of rights. Is what I'd say.
I don't think that's again because if we want a protection of
without retribution, rights violations don't mean anything. That's why we have the retribution. When you violate the rights, there's consequences to it.
Right, but I think once again, I gave you a case that was sans protection of other people's rights, and you gave me the same exact punishment in both those cases. So it's like it's no longer do we need to keep Carl in prison to protect society. We're doing it for retribution, is the underlying point.
Yes, but I guess again the question I'd ask is why are we stopping at just killing him? Why don't we torture him?
Yeah, well, I would say this. Don't you think that like why do you think that life in prison is sufficient just to make like retribution?
Sufficient retribution, because ultimately, once somebody uses their freedoms to go and basically destroy someone else's, I don't think they have that inherent right to the freedom to act. But
Okay,
I think
so
ultimately, the right to live so long as you're not an active threat towards someone is there.
Okay, so like I mean, when you're paralyzed, you have a large restriction of freedoms already. And so like we could assume that like after this accident,
So after he gets paralyzed, yes.
yeah, and maybe it's even like the case that I don't know, like he's living in a house or whatever that he's not going to escape from. Because he thinks that if he escapes, then the cops will come and take him. Like, we'll like I don't know, give him the death penalty or whatever. Like he'll get that sort of punishment.
Well,
it's like, would there be like an incentive for us to like go in and like put him in prison?
A few things I'd say about that. First off, I wouldn't say what happened to him there is retribution because ultimately it was just, I guess you could call it divine retribution in a sense because he got what he deserved from God, right? But I don't think that's retribution in the sense of the law because it wasn't actively put on him. Just like how if somebody went and robbed a store and then accidentally dropped their wallet and lost their credit cards and someone else picked them up and took them, that wouldn't be retribution. But
right.
So yes.
Yeah. My point was
agree with the fact that he's paralyzed.
Here's my thing. Is that the reason why I gave that is that it's also a restriction of his freedom.
Yes.
And so it's
I
like
agree.
So it's like
Now,
we can just keep him restricted in his freedom. Like there's no need for us to like restrict his freedom in another way. That's kind of
what
arbitrary.
I want to get to ask here is basically, are you saying when his condition won't really change if we put him in prison?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So, sorry, give me just a second to word my response to that. Yeah, so basically, I'd say that is a situation where it kind of sucks because, yeah, ultimately the only really retributive thing we can, or the retributive things we could do is either torture him or kill him.
Or fine him.
Or fine him or whatever else, whatever degree. I'd say like proportionally retributive because, again, I'm not arguing that it isn't retributive, but in that case, I would argue that we still, I don't think, should put him to death for that, no. And in terms of like bringing him to prison, a reason we should do it is solely to stay consistent, principally. That's it. Otherwise, I think just let him rot in his house. I, I mean, from like a perspective of like, oh, what if we don't want to spend taxpayer dollars? But I do think that we should bring him to prison solely to stay consistent on the principles that we're building this system off of. Yeah.
I mean, I guess in a way that's actually worse for society if you think about it. Bringing him into a prison because, again, the idea is that the conditions of his freedoms don't change, are not significantly restricted when he gets taken to prison. So instead of like him like door dashing all of his food, now we pay for it. So it's like now instead like what your system is leading to is a case in which, in order to enact retributive justice, the way we do that is by having everyone else pay for his living.
What I'd say is that's an unfortunate case where we wouldn't be able to get proper retribution. Just like I'd say when
I think we can.
I'd say when a mass shooter goes and kills themselves after they shoot up the school, like we're not gonna get proper retribution because they already killed themselves. And so again,
I mean, sure. I mean, in that case, like retribution is just impossible. Like there's no such thing as retribution onto someone who doesn't exist anymore. But we could get retribution on this other case. There is actually a case in which we can get retribution, which is the death penalty.
And I'd argue we can also get retribution through torture. So why aren't we arguing for that?
On the torture thing, I actually wanted to get into that point because I don't think that I'm not convinced that like life imprisonment is not a form of torture. For instance, like it's when you go into prison, like you're suffering constantly.
No, I'd agree. I'd agree. I think it is to an extent, but I don't think it's the same degree of torture as cutting off someone's arms, pouring acid on their head. It's the torture of having that lack of the right to freedom, and it's also in America, I'd say, the torture of a system where people basically get into gangs, fight each other. They basically operate in very terrible conditions where they're constantly at a fear of their life.
Well, like I mean, I don't think waterboarding Carl is unjust. But also like once again, it goes back to the idea of moral desert, which is that which is the unique finality of it, is that there's still like something valuable, or I don't know, I want to say valuable. There's something about like existing in general, even if it's
that
like
is
a sucky
valuable.
existence.
I would agree with that.
That is like I think it's better to, because then I could get into like other points with like the torturing thing is like, would it be better to live a bad life or to not live a life at all?
When we get into the point of existence, though, I think we have to get into more of a sort of area where we're like, okay, what happens when we die? Because I think ultimately that's what we have to base it off of, right? Is if existing has something inherently valuable, do we cease existing truly when we die? And I think obviously we're both Christians. We believe in an afterlife, right? And ultimately, I think God's retribution is going to be the best one. So I'd argue from the Christian perspective, I'd rather wait for God's final retribution for that person and let them have a life where the people under the death penalty are more likely to repent, right? But I'd rather them come to that choice freely.
Well, they are coming to it freely.
No, I'd argue there's a coercive force there in the fact that they know they're going to get killed.
I mean, you can say that with like any other form of punishment as well, like with like life in prison. I mean, my problem with like using
isn't the same. I could argue that with like just living in general too, because ultimately we will die, and that is a coercive force in a sense where we're like, oh, we're going to die someday. Maybe we should figure out what's going to happen in the afterlife, right? But I want it to be natural to the highest extent possible, while also being able to protect society and get retribution. And yes, in that one specific case you provided, it's not exactly retributive to put them in a prison, but still, I think generally as a principle it applies.
Right. So I have an issue with kind of like saying like I prefer like God's divine retribution, because it's like I
No,
do
I think we get both.
Yeah,
I think we get
sure.
both. I
But what I want to say is that well, first of all, like I mean, saying that like death is like sort of different like that. Yeah, like I'd rather like God provide retribution than for us to get retribution by administering the death penalty. I think that's first of all, that's not really like based on any form of like scripture or theological argument that I'm aware of. And like secondly, I mean, there's like of course there's like both, right? Like you can get like that doesn't like supersede the fact that we can get our own retribution as well, and that we do that, because I mean I could also just say like the same thing, and you also admitted to this, is I could just say the same thing like, okay, well then I won't give life imprisonment because I trust God's retribution more.
Yes, I would agree with that. However, I think there's a finality in the death penalty, which I would agree with you on, that there is a unique finality. I don't think that makes it the ultimate punishment we can give, however, but there is that unique finality, which does make it different, and the fact that it's not really something that, well, we can't reverse it, basically, right? I think is ultimately why. And I mean, we can't reverse what we did in the past, but we can neutralize the acid we poured on his head. We can't really sew his arms back on, but ultimately, I lost my train of thought. Ultimately, I guess what I'm saying when I say like I don't think we should be applying the final justice on Earth in a sense. I don't know if I'm wording that the best, but
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, it's not a final justice.
well, yeah,
There is like a certain finality to it that like, and it's sort of the idea that like, yeah, you by like murdering someone and you by committing the acts that Carl do, you forfeit like your sort of right to life in that sense. And that's why like with the torturing thing is that since it is, and you just admitted that's a unique form of punishment, that I care more about it being a unique form of punishment than about like doing the worst possible thing to the person. And there's like,
but why?
I mean, there's many cases, and there's like for like retributivism, for instance, like there is a case in which like, yeah, there's a portion of grace that applies to it as well, where we don't seek like eye to eye retribution for the sake of maintaining like grace and within our punishment. And by that, like particularly, I mean for in an instance in which, you know, someone like kills a person and you don't have to like on a second degree, you can sort of like provide them like a little bit of grace. I had like a better example for this. Oh yeah, so that's right. When we like get to the point where we're doing exactly what the person we're punishing is, that's kind of where it gets more like zero sum in a way, and that's kind of where it gets a little more iffy. It's like, yeah, like when we become like identical to the perpetrator, then there's an issue with that because we're committing this same exact wrongs as him, and it's more of out of a sake of like trying to balance it out. And that's why we can still be retributive, and that's why there's like a scale to it. And so there's not really like a point in seeking anything that would be like extraordinarily demeaning than like unique finality.
Yeah, I just disagree with that point. I don't think that, ultimately I do think we can get a higher degree than just, or of punishment than just death. And so, yeah. I guess, could you explain, sorry, one more time why you think the finality or the unique finality is like the ultimate end where...
Yeah, so I mean, for and there's in the torturing way, for instance, I don't think that's actually super unique to begin with. It's not unique in the sense that there's like the most fundamental part of the person's identity, which is their existence, still persists throughout the torturing, and so it's not very unique. And plus, I think it's more like maximizing the displeasures that they would have experienced through life in imprisonment rather than actually providing them with some sort of unique thing. So I think it's more similar to life imprisonment than to a death penalty. And so that's why I think that the death penalty is more unique in that sense. And it's sort of like, it's like being unique is something that like represents it within a society as like a sort of, like with the finality of it, it represents in society something that is like completely different from all the other forms. And so it's like, it's essentially shows like this is at the top of like something. So it's like, yeah, and of course, I'm also like not super convinced that like even that torture for life would be worse than like the death penalty. For instance, like I could see that like, yeah, torturing to death.
I'd say torture
maybe.
to death would be worse, and so that's
Yeah,
that's
sure.
the thing I'd say.
Yeah, so torture to death, yeah, sure, that could potentially be, that could be worse, but again, not necessary insofar as it doesn't need to be exactly eye for eye treatment.
Yeah, and I mean on the specific issues you were talking about with deterrence, I actually think that would benefit your deterrence case if you were to say, yeah, we should publicly maim this guy's arms off, hang him upside down, pour acid on his face. I think most people would find that really absurd, truthfully, and I think that is barbaric and not something.
Yes, that's why deterrence isn't the foundation of my system.
Yes, the foundation is retribution, and I agree with retribution, but I think it's only a part of the justice system.
I think it has to be the foundation of the justice system.
I'd argue you could say foundation of theory of punishment, but I'd argue the justice system goes further than that because we really have to ask, why do we have a justice system in the first place?
Yeah.
Because ideally we wouldn't have to punish anyone and everyone would just sing kumbaya and whatever. But people act poorly and we have to prevent people from doing that. We have to have rules in place and enforcements because we're trying to keep society ordered and trying to keep society safer as a whole. That's the reason we have a justice system. And so ultimately, I think that we have to... I think that retribution's absolutely a part of it, but it's not the only part.
Sure. I mean, my issue with that is like we can have like a justice system in which like we'll just have like we will do like pretend sort of like sentencings or whatever. Like we can like arbitrarily like put someone in a prison and say that they committed this crime, and then that would be something that would service to like kind of like teach society what is right and wrong.
Yeah. I'm not arguing for solely that. I think that is the reason why we have a justice system, though, is because there are people who act out of line, and we need to protect society from them. We're protecting the people that you're trying to sentence here, though. So that would contradict my core reason, because I'm saying we're protecting the people against the rights infringers. Right.
I think, but when you say that, that has to be founded on the claim that the right infringer, it is okay to, in fact, put them in prison, like to begin with. So it's like I mentioned, I think if you can have, because when we talk about like the justice system, we need to have a set of necessary conditions for the justice system. Is that like the justice system is for this, and then we also use the justice system like to help aid with these other things. So like, for instance, I don't think the justice system is like just for like rehabilitation or just for moral teaching or just for deterrence. And so I'm not saying like I'm not going to say like the reason why we have a justice system is for deterrence. It's like, no, I think the reason why we have a justice system is for retribution. And then we use that retribution as a means to get deterrence, to protect other people, to teach people morally, and to give them a proper rehabilitation.
Yeah, I guess fundamentally I just disagree because I see retribution as a part of the justice system, one of the things we get. But ultimately, why
can I
we
ask
have
a question?
Is the protection of those who are not rights infringers.
Like, can you imagine like a case like sans retribution that we would have a justice system? Could you imagine a case sans retribution that we would use a justice system?
A case sans retribution?
Yeah, without retribution, absent of
without
retribution.
Yeah. No. I think retribution is a core part of protecting.
Okay, so that means it's a necessary condition.
Yeah, it's a necessary condition, but it's not the only condition.
What was the other condition?
And I think there's instances in which a justice system could act without having proper retribution in the full sense.
Okay, can you give like the other condition? That what was it, like just to protect the society? That was your other condition?
Yes, I'd say to protect those who
I mean,
are not infringing
I could
on
just
the rights of
index this
others.
back to the case that I gave you earlier with Carl, who's there's no protection needed for it's like someone like Carl.
Yes, but ultimately, when we're designing a system, we have to discuss why. I'd argue, yeah, under like an ideal world, we could identify, okay, he will never be a threat, and we can just leave him in his house to be. But I would argue that basically, in reality, we'd have to, solely for consistency, is what it is. It's more of a pragmatic thing than like a, yes, we should. Though I do also think that it is right to seek retribution. However, I think that basically.
Can I touch on something real fast? Is that like, yeah, my point is if it's a necessary condition, then if I can imagine a case where that is not a part of the enactment of punishment, then it is not a necessary condition for the justice system to implement that. Like, so for instance, like I just gave you a case in which the protection of society is not necessary for someone like Carl who is paralyzed. And if that was the basis for the justice system, then that would have to be there. Because like we can't imagine, like the justice system wouldn't be the justice system without it.
Sorry, repeat that one more
Yeah.
time.
So it's like, I mean, it kind of gets into like a definition, like just definitively. A definition is like the sort of set of necessary conditions.
Yeah.
So like when we have like a justice system and we're defining the foundation of the justice system, then its enactments of punishment must be, it must be the case that the foundation of the justice system is present in all of its enactments, for instance. So like if the foundation of it is something that is not sufficiently effectuated within the justice system, then it's not a necessary condition of the justice system. Which is why I think the best way to put this is that the justice system is not the justice system without X. So it's like, I say the justice system is not the justice system without retribution, but I can say the justice system is the justice system in cases that are without the protection of society.
Wait, sorry, the last part, you could say the justice system is the
Yeah.
justice system without
Yes.
cases of the
So
protection
I
of
think
society.
the justice system is not the justice system without retributivism. The justice system can be the justice system. I'm fumbling on my words now. The justice system can be the justice system without protection of society.
Yeah, again, I don't think because there's one exception here where there's not exactly an easy way under my system to move forward. In the case of like protecting society, or like of protecting society, but also like we can't really get retribution in this case. I'd argue that's just similar to a case like basically with a murder suicide, where it's like retribution is impossible. I don't think retribution. I think it's possible in the sense that yes, you could enact the death penalty and that would be retributive, but I don't think it's something we should do. Is basically what I'm arguing. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think I want to circulate this again because I realized that throughout our conversation, we've kind of had the same line of dialogue, which is essentially saying like, well, why shouldn't we? Because it violates human dignity. It's like, well, why not? It's a violation of human dignity regardless. Why does it extend to this? And then you'll say something like, well, then I would just say like, why can't we just torture someone to death? But I actually do want to get your justification as to why specifically like the death penalty cannot at all be used to seek retribution.
I don't think at all. I don't think it should be used in the United States. That's the claim I'm making. I
Why?
don't think it should be used in the developed world precisely because of the unique finality, I would say. It's unlike if we send someone to prison and we're like, oh, we're wrong, we can release them. And yeah, there's people who are like Carl that are like wrong beyond a shadow of a doubt. But the reality is, throughout United States history, the death penalty has been used countless times on people who arguably weren't in the wrong. I can't remember the precise name, but there was one specific case of a mentally ill man who was very much innocent that just got the electric chair because of the death penalty, and even though he was innocent and was proven innocent after he died. And so the reality is, enacting it, I'd say since it's such a small thing that we do, ultimately, it's like 20 something people per year on average, right? And if there's a chance that even one of those 20 could feasibly be innocent, then I don't see a reason why we as a civilized society should allow for it, because I think it is just so unreasonable to allow something so irreversible when there have been cases in the past, and there can continue to be cases of people who are innocent being put to death. And ultimately, I think that is the core issue, I'd say, is I don't think it's really a good thing to do in society, even if there are people like Carl. And yes, I acknowledge that Carl is a terrible person. And, you know, I'd even go as far as to say I agree that he does deserve to die, but I don't think that means that we should take his life.
Okay, I think, so a few things. One, this is kind of a new argument. Two, this is more of like a probability argument than like an argument based off of principles.
Yeah.
And so for one, I kind of have an issue with that because you're not,
Yeah,
it's not an attack on the...
I haven't been very clear with exactly what I'm saying. I don't think the death penalty at its core is always wrong.
Yes.
I'm saying in our current society, I don't think it's wise to use it.
Okay. Well, okay. I actually want to get on this, and then I'll address some things later. So it's not. You mentioned that it was a violation of human dignity. Like that shouldn't be addressed. That it violates someone's right to life. So why? How is it compatible with that and the fact that it's not wrong in some cases?
There's still retribution in it, though, even if it violates dignity.
So you admit, and you even said Carl deserves to die. So you admit, like, yeah, in that case, it would be.
He deserves to. I don't think we should kill him. Is basically what it is.
Yeah.
Because again, it's more of an issue of we are progressed to a point where it's not necessary. And yes, I acknowledge there might not be full retribution in certain cases, but I still don't think it's a wise thing to allow.
Okay, I think
that's the core of what
I think this is I actually think this is a pretty big concession, because you were using like the sort of right to life argument throughout like a large portion of the debate. And I think if you say like, yeah, it's a violation of someone's right to life.
Yes, there can still be retribution when a right is violated, is what I would say.
Okay, just real quick, like yes or no, like do you think like a self-defense case, like do you think that's a violation of a right to life? It's just like superseded?
Self-defense is not a violation.
Okay,
because there's an active threat on the...
Okay, so you think it's possible that it is a violation of someone's right to life, but it's not wrong?
I think violating rights in itself is always wrong. However, I think the retribution can outweigh that.
Okay, so it's like, ooh, this is getting into a lot of like weird like meta stuff. Okay, so so you're saying like if the good outweighs the bad, then it should be done?
Not necessarily, no, because...
Yeah, I could, because of course I think you see where that leads you.
Yeah,
of course.
No.
I'm just wondering, like, then why in this case would it be okay to seek something that is better than the amount of bad that would come from it?
Why in this case?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a few reasons. I think the first one is ultimately there's something to be said about, first off, because we're talking about America in particular. And so the first thing I'd say is America has been founded on this idea of fair trial, beyond a reasonable doubt, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately, I think the pinnacle of that is being able to say, like, even the worst people still basically we will treat humanely. Even though they suck, we hate them, we treat them humanely out of pure principle. I think that is one thing. And another thing is, again, it is an issue where people have been falsely sentenced to death before, and it is unique in the fact that it is final. And ultimately, I think it's extremely, extremely unjust whenever that happens.
Mm.
I'd say someone being falsely sentenced to death outweighs the amount of justice that would come from many, many people being properly. And ultimately, that's the core thing, is we do not need it to be a good society. And I would argue that basically I think that we have too much of a focus on this idea of punishment and not enough on the idea of retribution. And I think we need to shift the focus to there. And ultimately, because of basically that's what I would say, is I think that retribution is good, but I think rehabilitation is better. We have a system that really decentralizes rehabilitation, and ultimately I think the death penalty still existing, whereas it doesn't in most developed countries, is really a symptom of this American idea of, like, just basically when people screw up, we throw them in prison and they end up staying there. And some of them end up dying in prison. So that's what I would say, is ultimately I think it would be better for society.
All right, so what I wanted to, there's a few things before I get into like the sort of like practicality of it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, like, I think that there are cases in which we absolutely know for certain that someone has like committed a crime, and that it's grotesque enough to the point where, yeah, we can be confident that a death sentence onto this person would be justifiable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like sort of like, yeah, there are cases, yeah, where, yeah, sure, people who are innocent were sentenced to death and that was completely unjust. But I mean, that's largely, I mean, that's also more attributed to like a failure of the judicial system, because like, again,
Yeah,
like,
I'd agree.
yeah, so,
I don't think we can have a judicial system that,
yeah, I mean, so
unless
I
we
mean,
literally
again,
sentence like no
like
one to death.
my issue is that I can say that sort of same thing largely for like life imprisonment, even though like, and I know you're going to mention the finality of it, but of course the same sort of principle applies. If we sentence someone to like 20 years of prison and we find out after the prison sentence that they're innocent,
But they died in prison, is that what you're...
yeah, they died in prison or
Yes,
something
but they
like
didn't
that.
have to. They didn't have to live every day of that 20 years thinking that they're gonna die soon. And
No,
when people are on
wasn't. It
death
wasn't like
row-
about. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even care if this person's sent on like death row or not. Just the fact that like, yeah, we could like unjustly punish people in a similar way.
Yeah, I
but
think any justice system we have will have that issue.
yeah,
but I don't
there's
think
a few
that's a
things.
reason not to avoid it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, also to get into is that like, falsely sentencing people becomes less and less of a concern over time, and I think there's a difference between like beyond reasonable doubt and absolutely certain, for instance. And like, so what I would propose would be after the guilty verdict is handed down during the sentencing portion of the trial. During that, the prosecution would have to maintain the fact that we are absolutely certain that this person has committed a crime of significant moral weight. And then the jury in the system that would go about that would, then they would make the judgment based off of like, yeah, we're like completely certain that like this guy has done it. And then again, that's why you have a long period of time to like kind of deliberate on like how certain can we be really? Maybe like new evidence, if there's enough time for new evidence to come up to show that. But like even then, like it's completely imaginable. Like in the cases like Carl come up that like, yeah, I would trust the government to administer a death penalty onto him. I don't know why the prospects of like there could be a case in which we would use it on someone else mean that we just shouldn't kill Carl at all.
Because I would say that the evil from somebody who did nothing wrong getting killed by the government, it arbitrarily just far, far outweighs any good that does come from the very few cases of the death penalty we have a year.
Sure. I mean, I think the bigger part of that claim was that, like, we know that Carls should die. And I'm sorry, could you like articulate like the part of that again?
Basically, what I would say is if we had 1,000 people, 10,000 people, whatever number you want to say, being sentenced to death, and 9,999 of them are Carls, and one of them is someone who was completely innocent, I would choose to save the innocent person and keep the Carls in prison for life, because I think it would be that unjust to have someone innocent be sentenced to death. And the reality is, I don't think we should trust the government to be able to always discern this absolute certainty, because the reality is they haven't historically, and just expecting things to get
sure. Well, my standard and system is a little bit different from historical standards, where the death penalty was used a lot more loosely. But then, even then, in those historical cases, I could probably like say for like even under your perspective, for the sake of pragmatism, you would probably be fine with allowing that. For like, so it's like your point is in conjunction with the fact that we need protection of like society. But I gave you a situation in which retribution is necessary, sans protection of society, bringing up, and that's in a modern world, and you would allow it in like a previous world for the sake of like pragmatism. There's a lot of stuff going on, but I'm trying to hone it in. I think there's a little bit, I guess I'm trying to say there's a little bit of ad hocness.
I wouldn't necessarily allow it for the sake of pragmatism. I just think that's a separate debate from America specifically, which is why I mentioned it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like, so like
we're talking about America. Is basically what I was saying there.
Yeah.
To clarify.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's I forgot if I mentioned this already, but as we like develop more scientifically, like forensic science and all that, we can be more and more certain of like someone's committing of a crime. Like like technology keeps advancing, and this concern that we'll like accidentally execute the wrong person is completely reduced. But also like that's why I offered this sort of system where like a very select few amount of people are first of all sentenced to death. Like it's only going to be for like for very egregious crimes that you could even be sentenced to death. And then of those, again, like of those like very egregious crimes, it's only if the jury and prosecution and judge agree that there's absolute certainty. And then even then, there could be like large amounts of time of like deliberation and potential time for rehabilitation. So like maybe like a good person would be motivated to, like an innocent person would be motivated to rehabilitate, but like a Carl isn't motivated to rehabilitate. So it's like, yeah, we can very much be certain that that's not going to help like a Carl Panzer. So
I guess actually there's an issue I still feel hasn't been adequately addressed, which is exactly how do we draw the line of where we're doing the death penalty. I know you said leave it up to a jury, whatever, but I don't think that's really something that I would consider a meaningful reason of where we draw the line.
Well, so there's I do want to get into something else. Let me just make a note of this. So regarding like a sort of like principled approach, there's not really going to be a good principle. Of course, there's like certain like principled aspects of it. So it's like if it's a first degree murder, that has to at least be like a necessary condition of it. Is that it has to be at least a first degree murder.
Okay,
and
so,
then of course,
so you agree at least a first degree murder.
Yes.
So like yeah, no other crimes, just first degree murder.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, and then, like, I mean, I don't know if, like, I guess terrorism is probably, like, counted for in first-degree murder as well.
That would be counted for,
yeah.
yeah.
And so, and then with that as well, like, there would probably have to be, like, an element of it that's, like, particularly, like, a particular brutalization of the victim. Like, for instance, so, like, maybe, maybe, like, a more... like a more painless death would be like whatever adds to like the wrongness of it adds more to the weight of the fact that like yeah it could be used as like for a death penalty. But yeah, so I mean I think first of all like that's already like a pretty good principle like first degree murder, that's already like a pretty good like binary thing. And then like we can just then like add other things to it. Of course, the more people that you kill, the more likely you are as well to be sentenced to death. And like for like serial killers, I think especially like if I wanted to be even more harsh, and I'm probably more like agnostic on this right now, but if I wanted to be like even more harsh, I could say like, yeah, you have to like commit at least 2 first-degree murders, or something like that, or 2 serial murders.
Well, the thing I'd say with that is like why 2, but yeah, I think at least a first-degree murder is reasonable criteria to state. Yeah. Okay. Wait. What was the thing you wanted to get into?
Sure. The other thing was that again is that life sentences would also be unjust onto like extremely unjust onto a person who's innocent as well. So
yes,
I think
I agree, but we also
both
both agree that the death penalty is unique and the fact that it's final, which is ultimately why I think that it isn't wise to use in society.
Right. Yeah. So there's a point here in which sure it's unique, but I think that the harm induced onto like the person who's given the life sentence and the person who's given the death penalty is not significant enough such that the injustice of killing an innocent person outweighs the injustice of killing a person on a life sentence to the significant point such that like achieving retributive justice through the death penalty on many other people who are deserving of it is useless or like not ideal.
No, I would disagree. People with life sentences will, on average, have more time to potentially be freed and will also not have to spend their life with the fear and the knowledge that they're going to be executed for a crime they didn't commit.
Life expectancy in prison is very low.
I know. I think that's an issue of the prison system that I would not have under my system. So
that's an issue with the prison. Okay,
I think we need to be more ordered towards rehabilitation, and the life expectancy being low is really a result of specifically American prisons. Again, places like I hate bringing it up like 5 million times, but like Norway's prison system, they have a significantly higher life expectancy than America's. Or you can fact check me on that if you want, but I'm like I can guarantee that's true. And so really, ultimately, that's more of a symptom of the U.S. prison system in particular, and something I would change. So, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I brought up like the life expectancy thing more as to show that like, yeah, in the United States, like yeah, under if you just like change the law like right now to like my proposed system, which isn't too far off, but is like a little bit more stricter. Then there's a lot of like there's I need to get back on my train of thought, but you change the system to my current system under the life expectancy thing. There's not going to be like the amount of time that like someone in death row would have, and a lot of people do just like die on death row. Because of like the amount of time it takes. So I don't think it would be like significantly longer to the point where like the amount, like the 2-year difference, for instance, that like, you know, maybe like someone would have like someone would live like X amount of years like longer or whatever, wouldn't have been like a significant amount of time to find like evidence that would reverse the sort of like death penalty. But I mean, of course, as well, like when you're like, if there's like even expected evidence to like arise later, there would be a lot of deliberation from attorneys saying like, oh, we're doing more investigation on this. There could be new evidence that arises. And I think if there's even the potential for new evidence to arise, then we would already like see that that potential is starting to like form, or that there is a potential there, rather than like 20 years from the moment. There's not really much to investigate after that. Like it's very, very unlikely that like a case will come out in which like 20 years after, like 20 plus years after the murder occurred, that there's evidence to show that the innocent person is in fact innocent. So we would, and of course, in cases, there has been like a few cases in which that has happened, but those cases are usually in conjunction with a large amount of scientific development and advancements. So like what that means is that like it's because there is a new innovation in forensic science, and we're pretty much at a point in forensic science where there's a lot of, there's not too much more like innovations, more just like fine tuning the amount of, how do you call it, like the amount of success, the success rate of the sort of like forensic analyses. So I think that's like those are like a few things that kind of like mitigate this struggle, the life expectancy thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any more to add, or should we just go to closing statements?
We should go to closing.
I think so too. I think now is a good time.
Yes. 1:30 in the morning. I checked my watch and I was like, dang, we've been talking.
Oh yeah. Wouldn't it be funny if the camera like was off this whole time? Okay. Yeah, for my closing statement, just wanted to, reiterate my like core fundamental like portions. I think overall, I held the stronger foundation in the debate. I think I was able to maintain to some of my principles a lot more than you were able to maintain to a lot of your principles. For instance, I think I showed that the foundation of the justice system is retributivism through my examples of being able to illustrate punishment in which we would want to enact on the basis of retributivism, where there's no other factors at play. And again, the argument is that like, since it has to be a necessary condition for it to be the foundation of the justice system, if there's a case in which it is not present and it would still be a punishment we would enact through the justice system, then it is not a necessary condition for it to be the foundation of the justice system. And so I think I illustrated that pretty well with my example of Karl Panzram, getting paralyzed and all that, and how we want to seek retributive justice for that. I think I illustrated how the scaling in conjunction with grace and retributivism, how that would indicate unique finality of death being admissible under certain cases, namely with the fact that we do have this sort of like intuition that inadequate punishment, such as like the $75 fine onto Karl, would be appalling, and I think like very intuitively, first of all, that life imprisonment would be very inadequate punishment, especially in the paralysis case that I gave as well. And there is a possibility to seek retribution there. My other points, of course, the bulk of the discussion was about retributivism, but I think there's a good theory of deterrence. There's not really strong evidence that there's not a deterrence effect, and I would rather like err on the side of caution with that. With like moral teaching, again, this is something we didn't touch upon like too much, which is actually like how the unique finality of death shows that this is like there are degrees of wrongness to certain actions in a society, and it could teach our society that like this sort of action that Karl did is like a sort of unique like ultimate wrongness. And so because of that, like we have like a more, Karl gets something that's more intense than something that a second degree murderer would get. Of course, I also mentioned the aspect about rehabilitation by creating an incentivization structure where people are incentivized to, make a genuine moral reflection within their time in prison with the looming fear of death over their head. And so I think my points stuck. I think my opponent's points did not stick too well. Mainly, for a large portion of the debate, there was discussion about the right to life and how the death penalty would violate the right to life. And by the end of the debate, it seems like you kind of flipped on that a little bit by indicating that, yeah, that Carl does deserve to die, and that it would be good for like a Carl to die, and that like seeking this sort of retribution would kind of like um, that like that would outweigh the wrongness of violating his right to life. I pressed you on some of like the principles of that, like why in this case it would be okay to induce to commit a wrong action because it has greater societal benefits. And I don't think we received a proper answer to that because that was essentially the claim that was made, but it's not a principled claim. And so regarding the particular case of this, I didn't really detect a good reason to allow for a wrong action for the sake of greater societal benefit in that case. Of course, and then there's the point about like Carl deserving to die, but we shouldn't kill him. I think that point was, I think that was not really I think that's kind of a shaky point for a few reasons. One thing is that like, yeah, you're agreeing that something would be intrinsically morally good to do. The foundation of the justice system, as I believe I properly laid out as well, and that, but we still shouldn't do that because there could be future prospects of potentially, maybe probably killing someone who's innocent, prospects of which are rapidly deteriorating, and of which my system, I think, accounted for very significantly. I also think that a lot of the points that my opponent made onto the death penalty also lie on life imprisonment. For instance, like when we talk about like human dignity and all of that, like we have to show like there's a reason to violate human dignity in order to like achieve like some sort of like justice, for instance, or that's kind of the reason. But when you engage in an action that typically would violate someone's human dignity, you have to have a reason to justify that. Like this supersedes this person's right to not be violated in this sort of way. And I think when you maintain that position, that it's possible through justice in order to do that, essentially, that it's, so to speak, it seems like arbitrary why you would like then like take out the death penalty as a sort of part of that. Of course, so then just looking into it, there was some talks about the budget. This wasn't really like a super big portion of it, but something that I should probably address, which was, of course, like the claim that like, yeah, like where like our taxpayer money is going to is that, yeah, sure, there's still a significant amount of like taxpayer money going to sustain the life of people on death row as well, but it's more so the fact that more people would probably be comfortable with sustaining the life temporarily of someone like Carl, with the knowledge that it will end, essentially, that it's not like a permanent thing that they're going to be doing for life. I think people would much rather, would be much more comfortable with their taxpayer money going towards a process that is seeking the ends of Carl's life than a process that is seeking the sustainment of Carl's life. And then, of course, a lot of talk about Carl, so I just want to push out the intuition again. Remember the story I told at the beginning. Carl Panzram met a young boy in Portland, basically manipulated him to come on his yacht, brutally tortured him, bounded him down, strapped him down, tied him up, he couldn't run away or anything, brutally, sadistically raped him and killed him. And he did this to many, many other more people, and he enjoyed it. He killed 22 people and raped over 1,000 people, which is a huge number. I can't even fathom that. And really, if you can look at the face of someone like Carl and say that, yeah, you deserve to have your life sustained by society, I think that's completely outrageous, and I don't think we have a good reason to believe that we would prefer life imprisonment for Carl rather than the death sentence. So, and then again, of course, I gave my case with Carl. Carl's like gets paralyzed. He never could do it again. He gets a change of moral heart, so he never would do it again. Has no reason to, is not a threat to society or anything. The only reason why we would punish him would be through retribution, and then the only adequate retribution would be the death sentence. So I think this was illustrated quite well and quite strongly, and I think the grounds that my opponent has to debate on are a lot more shaky. He may talk a lot more about practicality within his closing statement, but it's fundamentally not an in principle objection that could undercut the foundation of the arguments I laid out. So, that being said, that's my closing statement.
All right. Ultimately, I think the debate just comes down to the fact that we have to have a certain respect for people's rights and people's freedoms, even if it can be inherently retributive in the fact that we might violate them for the sake of justice. And ultimately, I think the core issue here is that we live in a world where we have the means that we can treat people with humanity even if they absolutely suck. And I do believe that we should, because there have been cases in the past of people being falsely accused. And at best, the evidence my opponent raised was just saying like, oh, I don't think these cases will happen in the future. But not thinking them doesn't make them not happen. And I would argue that even if 1 out of 10,000 people sentenced to death row gets unjustly killed, that is a far, far bigger injustice than any amount of justice from sentencing to death. On top of that, I would just say it's not about doing a bad action for the sake of greater societal good. It's about not taking a specific action for the sake of greater societal good. The reality is the societies with the most successful justice systems do not have the death penalty, which is not in itself proof that the death penalty should be abolished, but it is a good pointer. And ultimately, I think that we want a justice system that really just seeks to do what protects rights the most in society and what will propagate the culture that will allow for the society that thrives the most through these rights and freedoms.
All right. Great debate on the death penalty. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments if we should have the death penalty, capital punishment. Let me know what you think of this debate and so on. But yeah, again, I'm going to link his channel in the description. Go ahead and check it out. We're doing a lot of cool stuff here at UC Berkeley. So yeah, thank you. Goodbye.